Finally, it was time for God's people to enter the promised land. But first, they had to cross the Jordan River. There were no bridges or boats. God told the priests to carry the holy box and walk into the water. When they did, God made a dry path, and his people walked across to the other side of the river. The first city they came to was Jericho. It had huge walls and gates and guards everywhere. God said,
"March around Jericho every day for 6 days. 7 priests with trumpets must march at the front. On the 7th day, march around 7 times. Then have the priests blow one long blast on their trumpets. The people must shout, and the walls will fall down."
The people obeyed, and down came the walls. Joshua fought hard to win the land God had promised to his people. And God helped him. One time, God even sent huge hailstones to fall on the enemy. During that same battle, Joshua said,
"Sun, stand still!"
And God kept the sun right where it was until his people finally won the battle.
One of the leaders of God's people was chosen before he was born. An angel told the mother,
"You will have a son, but you must never cut his hair. His long hair will show that he's a Nazirite, someone who has work to do for God."
This baby grew up to be very strong. His name was Samson. And he always won against his enemies. Samson had a friend named Delilah. She asked,
"What makes you so strong, Samson?"
At first, he wouldn't tell her. She begged and whined. Finally, he said,
"If someone shaved my head, I would lose my strength."
When Samson fell asleep, Delilah had someone shave off his hair. Samson wasn't strong anymore. Now his enemies had no trouble taking him to their prison. In prison, Samson's hair grew long again. One night, his enemies had a party. They brought Samson in and made fun of him. Samson prayed,
Lord, please, give me strength one more time.
and God did. When Samson pushed against the pillars that held up the building, down it all came on top of everyone. Those people would never hurt anyone again. Ruth and Naomi were widows. That means their husbands had died. Young Ruth had been married to Naomi's son. One day, Naomi decided to go back home to Israel where she was born. Ruth wanted to go with her. Naomi feared that Ruth would miss her family and friends, so she told Ruth not to come. But Ruth said,
Please, don't ask me to leave you. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God.
And so they went together. But Ruth and Naomi were very poor. They didn't have enough to eat. Naomi was too old to work, so Ruth went out to a rich man's field to gather leftover grain for food. One day, the rich man named Boaz saw Ruth. She was a beautiful young woman.
Stay here. Work in my field.
Naomi decided Boaz would be a good husband for Ruth. So she came up with a plan to find out if Boaz wanted to marry Ruth. That night, Ruth went to the field where Boaz had been working hard all day. He was sleeping beside a pile of grain, and Ruth quietly laid down at his feet. About midnight, Boaz woke up suddenly and rolled over. He was startled. There was a woman lying near his feet.
Ruth? Ruth, is that you?
Yes, I am Ruth, your servant. Please spread your cover over me if you want to take care of me.
Boaz was pleased.
The Lord bless you, Ruth. Your kindness to me is great. Everyone knows you are a very good woman.
Boaz loved Ruth and asked to marry her. After they were married, Ruth had a little boy, which made all of them very happy. As a young boy, Samuel was sent to help Eli the priest in doing the Lord's work. One night, Samuel ran to where Eli was sleeping. Samuel had heard someone call his name, and he thought it was Eli.
I didn't call you. Go back to bed.
So Samuel went back to bed, but the voice called him 2 more times. After the 3rd time, Eli knew that God was calling Samuel. Eli told Samuel that it must be God speaking.
Next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord. I'm listening."
God told Samuel that he was going to punish Eli's sons because they were evil. Samuel grew up to be a godly man. A war broke out, and God's people decided to take the holy box into battle. But this went against God's rules. Guess what? The enemy captured the holy box of God and took it home with them. God's people were sad. As soon as the enemy got the holy box of God home, bad things started happening to them. They wanted to get rid of it. They put the holy box in a cart pulled by 2 cows and sent it home. When God's people saw the holy box coming, they were so happy. The enemy wasn't quite through yet. They saw God's people meeting together and decided to attack them. The people begged Samuel to pray. When he did, God sent a thunderclap so loud, it frightened the enemy soldiers. Then God's people chased them away.
Samuel had become a prophet. God sent him to the house of a man named Jesse to choose a new king for Israel. When Samuel looked at 7 of Jesse's sons, God said to him,
Don't look at how tall or handsome they are.
Are these all of your sons?
My youngest son is taking care of the sheep. His name is David.
God said to Samuel,
David is the one I have chosen.
But David was just a boy, serving his father as a shepherd. It was his job to protect and care for sheep. While he was with the sheep, he used to make up songs and sing them to God. One of those songs says,
The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need.
As David watched the sheep, he became close friends with God. God's Holy Spirit came to be with David, making him brave and strong. One day, Jesse sent his son David to go check on his brothers, who were soldiers. When David got to the battlefield, he found the Israelite soldiers were all afraid of a giant named Goliath. Goliath liked to yell at the soldiers and scare them. He wanted to hurt them. But David wasn't afraid of Goliath. He gathered 5 small, smooth stones and put them in his pouch. Then, with his slingshot in one hand, David went to meet Goliath. The giant laughed when he saw that David was just a boy. But David shot a stone from the slingshot. It hit Goliath in the head and killed him. By killing the giant Goliath, David became a hero. God's people loved him. But King Saul became jealous of David. King Saul had a son named Jonathan, who was a prince of Israel and David's best friend. King Saul told Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. So Jonathan decided to warn his friend.
My father is looking for a chance to kill you, but I have a plan. Tomorrow morning, you hide behind that big rock. I'll come out with my bow and pretend to shoot at a target. Then I'll send a boy to find the arrows. If I say to him, "No, you've gone too far. The arrows are closer to me," that means you are safe. But if I say, "Go farther. The arrows went past the big rock," that means my father won't change his mind, and you are in danger.
So David hid behind the rock. Saul and Jonathan were nearby. The king was very angry with his son.
Jonathan, don't you know that as long as David is alive, you'll never be king? He must die!
But father, David has done nothing wrong.
Then Saul threw his spear at Jonathan, trying to kill his own son. So Jonathan and his servant ran away toward the big rock. Jonathan said to the boy,
"Run and find this arrow."
When the boy ran toward the rock, Jonathan shot the arrow way beyond the rock and called out,
"Go further. The arrows went past you."
So David knew the news was bad. When the boy left, David came out and hugged his dear friend. Even though they were grown men, they were both crying. But David cried the most.
David, my friend, go in peace. We have been promised by the Lord that you and I and all our descendants will be friends forever.
Years later, Jonathan and his father died in a battle against Israel's enemy, and David became king. Because of his great friendship with Jonathan, King David took care of Jonathan's crippled son Mephibosheth for the rest of his life. After Samuel, David, and Solomon died, God's people were split into two kingdoms, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. The ruler of Israel was King Ahab, who did many things that God said were wrong. He worshipped idols and did more evil than any king before him. So God sent Elijah, the prophet, to teach Ahab a lesson.
Ahab, God says there will be no rain for many years.
This made Ahab very angry. Elijah had to run away from Ahab and camp near a brook. God sent birds to bring the prophet food. When the brook dried up, God told Elijah to go ask a certain woman for food.
I only have enough left for one meal for me and my son.
But Elijah said,
"Cook for me first, and you'll be all right."
When she obeyed, God did a miracle. She didn't run out of food for 3 years. After those 3 years passed with no rain, God told Elijah to go meet King Ahab.
There you are, you troublemaker.
But it was really the king who caused the trouble.
Let's see whose God is real.
So the king's prophets built one altar to their God, and Elijah built an altar to his God. They put offerings on each of them. Then they prayed and waited to see whose God would answer their prayers by sending fire to burn up the sacrifice. The king's prophets screamed at their fake gods to send fire. No fire came. Elijah teased.
Pray louder. Your God must be sleeping.
They did. But nothing happened. When they stopped, Elijah had water poured over everything on the altar he'd built. Then he prayed to God in heaven to send fire. Fire came down. It burnt up the offering, the stones, and the water. Then the people knew that Elijah's God was the most powerful of all. The land of Babylon was ruled by the king of Persia. But God's people were still living in Babylon. One of them was a young woman named Esther. The king of Persia wanted a beautiful young woman to be his queen. And he chose Esther. About this time, Esther's cousin Mordecai got in trouble.
Hey, Mordecai. Here comes General Haman. You better bow down to the leader of the king's army.
No, I will only bow down to the God of my fathers.
This made Haman so angry that he made a plan to kill all God's people living in Persia. Neither Haman nor the king knew that Queen Esther was related to Mordecai, or even that she was one of God's people. So the king agreed to Haman's evil plan. When Mordecai found out about the plan, he went secretly to visit the queen.
You must go to the king and beg him to have mercy on our people.
But I have not been called to the king. Anyone who enters his throne room without permission will be killed. Unless he holds out his gold scepter.
Yes, you may be killed. But who knows? You may have been chosen queen for just such a time as this.
The young woman had a big decision to make. One that could get her killed. Or it could save God's people.
All right. Tell all God's people to stop eating and start praying for me. I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I die, I die.
So Esther put on her royal robes and went to see the king. When the king's servants saw her, they were afraid she would be put to death. But when the king saw Esther, he was very pleased. Slowly, he held out his gold scepter.
What is it, my queen? What do you want to ask me?
My king, I ask that you have mercy on me and my people, the Jews. Haman wants us all to be killed.
And that day, the king decided to save Esther and all God's people from Haman's evil plan.
God's people were captured and taken away to the country of Babylon. The king of that country was named Nebuchadnezzar. 3 young Israelites, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, worked for King Nebuchadnezzar. But when the king wanted them to bow down and worship a golden idol he made, they wouldn't do it.
We can't. Let's go.
So the king called for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Is it true that you did not worship the golden statue I have set up? I will give you a second chance to bow down and worship.
or no god will be able to save you from my power.
Nebuchadnezzar, you certainly have the power to throw us into the furnace. And our God has the power to save us. But even if he doesn't, we will not worship your statue.
The king was furious and told his soldiers to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown in. But guess what happened? The men in the furnace didn't burn up. God sent someone to protect them in the furnace. The king was surprised when he saw 4 people walking around. So he told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out of the furnace. And the king made a new law. No one would be allowed to say anything bad about the God of Israel.
One day, the angel of the Lord came to a man named Gideon, who was working hard on his family's farm.
The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Go save God's people from their enemy.
But Gideon hesitated.
My family is the weakest in our tribe, and I am the weakest in our family.
Gideon, the Lord will be with you.
So, after talking some more with the angel, Gideon believed God and agreed to do what the angel had told him. Before long, Gideon had gathered up a great army. But when God saw it, he said,
You have too many men. I don't want the Israelites to brag that they saved themselves.
So God told Gideon to make an announcement.
Any man who is afraid of the enemy may go home.
And thousands of them did just that. But then God told Gideon he still had too many men.
Take the men down to the water to drink. Keep only those men who use their hands to bring water to their mouths.
Most of the men carelessly tossed their weapons on the ground and put their faces right into the water. Only 300 soldiers drank the way God wanted. So this was Gideon's army. Next, God gave Gideon very strange instructions.
Each man is to take a trumpet, a jar, and a torch.
Later, in the dark of night, Gideon's men surrounded the camp while the enemy was sleeping. When everyone was in position, they shouted,
The sword of the Lord! Gideon! The sword of the Lord!
Then they blew their trumpets and smashed their pots, so the fire from their torches circled the enemy. But each of Gideon's men stayed in their place. Down in the valley, the enemy soldiers woke up and were so scared that they began fighting one another. With great noise and confusion, the enemy soldiers all ran away. And that is how God used Gideon to save his people from their enemies.
An Israelite woman named Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah. They were happy together. But Hannah wasn't able to have any children. One of the other mothers was mean to Hannah and often made fun of her because she had no children. One day, Hannah got so upset that she went to God's holy tent to pray for a baby.
Lord of heaven, please don't forget me. If you will give me a son, I will give him back to you all his life.
While Hannah kept praying, Eli the priest noticed something strange. Hannah's lips moved, but he couldn't hear her voice. He didn't realize that she was praying in her heart. Eli thought she must be doing something wrong.
No, Master, I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I was telling the Lord about all the problems and sadness in my heart.
Ah, well, may the God of Israel give you what you asked of him.
Hearing this, Hannah was not sad anymore. And very soon, Hannah's prayer was answered. She had a baby boy and named him Samuel, which means God heard. Hannah and Elkanah were very happy. Several years passed, and young Samuel was growing up. But Hannah never forgot her promise to the Lord. So she traveled with Samuel to see Eli the priest.
My master, I am the same woman who stood near you praying for a child many years ago. The Lord has given me a son, and now I give him back to the Lord. He will belong to the Lord all his life.
So Samuel went to live in the temple. And every year, Hannah made her son a new coat because of her great love for little Samuel.
After King David died, his son Solomon became king of Israel. One night, God came to Solomon in a dream.
Ask for anything you want, and I will give it to you.
Lord, my God, you have allowed me to be king in my father's place. But I am like a little child. I do not have the wisdom I need to do what I must do. So I ask that you give me wisdom. Wisdom to know the difference between right and wrong.
The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom.
Since you asked for wisdom, and not long life, or riches, or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked. Your wisdom will be greater than anyone has ever had in the past.
So God gave Solomon everything he needed to become a great king. One day, two women brought a baby to Solomon. One woman said,
My master, this woman and I live in the same house. We each gave birth to a baby the same week. No one else was in the house with us. One night, this woman's baby died. So during the night, she took my son from my bed while I was asleep and put the dead baby in my bed.
But the other woman said,
No, the living baby is my son. The dead baby is yours.
So the two women argued in front of the king. But Solomon knew just what to do to find out who the real mother was.
Bring me a sword.
So his servants brought the sword.
Cut the living baby into 2 pieces and give each woman half.
The servants were shocked, but the king remained firm. So as the sword was raised, one woman cried out,
No, don't hurt the baby. Give him to her.
But the other woman said,
Neither of us will have him. Cut him in half.
Woman, your son.
When the people of Israel heard about King Solomon's decision, they knew God had given him wisdom to make the right decisions.
Naaman was an important soldier in Damascus, but he got a terrible skin disease called leprosy. People who had leprosy were not allowed to come close to other people. They had to live in lepers' towns. Naaman's wife had a little servant girl from Israel who said,
I wish my master could meet Elisha the prophet. He would heal him.
So Naaman went to Israel to find Elisha.
Tell him to wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and he'll be healed.
The Jordan River. Wash 7 times in the Jordan.
Naaman walked away angry. What Elisha told him to do seemed silly.
He didn't even come out to talk to me himself. I thought Elisha would call on the Lord or wave his hand over me and heal the disease. Our rivers in Damascus are all better than the Jordan.
So Naaman prepared to return to Damascus. But his servant pleaded with him.
Sir, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? Doesn't it make more sense to just do what he said?
So even though Naaman was embarrassed, he went down to the river to wash himself as Elisha had instructed. After Naaman finished washing for the 7th time, guess what happened? His leprosy disappeared.
Now I know there is no God in all the earth except the God of Israel.
Daniel was one of God's people who was a slave in Babylon. But God had blessed him with power to understand dreams. Years ago, he had even helped a king of Babylon understand a dream. But now there was a new king in Babylon. One night, Belshazzar gave a banquet for many important people. Suddenly, a hand appeared and began writing on the wall in words that no one could read. The king was very scared. But the king's mother remembered Daniel.
There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy God in him. Call for Daniel. He will tell you what the writing on the wall means.
God has counted the days until your kingdom will end. You have been weighed on the scales and found not good enough. Your kingdom will be given to the Medes and the Persians.
That very same night, Belshazzar was killed. A man named Darius the Mede became the new king. It all happened exactly as Daniel had said. In time, Daniel went to work for the new king, even though he served the God of Israel. Some men from the new kingdom of the Medes were jealous of Daniel and wanted to get rid of him. So they tricked Darius into making a rule that people could only pray to the king. If someone broke the rule, he would be thrown into the lion's den. But Daniel went to his house, got down on his knees, and prayed to God, just as he had always done. So the men caught Daniel praying to God and told the king. The king was sad because he liked Daniel, but he couldn't change the law.
May the God you serve all the time save you.
So Daniel was thrown into a den of hungry lions, and a huge stone was rolled over the entrance. But God sent an angel to close the mouths of the lions so they couldn't bite. Early in the morning, the king came to the lion's den.
Daniel, has your God been able to save you from the lions?
Yes, my king. God sent his angel to close the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because I am innocent.
And that's how God saved the man who trusted in him. God spoke to a man named Jonah.
Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it. I see the evil things they do.
So Jonah got up and boarded a boat that would take him to Tarshish? Wait, that's not where God told Jonah to go. He was supposed to go to Nineveh. This ship was going the opposite direction. But God saw what Jonah was doing. So Jonah sailed away on the ship. Before long, God sent a big storm. Waves pounded the ship. The sailors were afraid and started throwing cargo into the sea, hoping to lighten the ship so it wouldn't sink. The captain went down into the bottom of the ship and found Jonah sleeping.
Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will save us.
But Jonah had already told some of the sailors that he was running away from the Lord.
Jonah has done something terrible to cause the storm.
You're right. I ran away from God. It's my fault that this storm has come upon you. Throw me into the sea, and it will calm down.
So the sailors tossed Jonah overboard. As soon as Jonah was in the water, the sea became calm. Down into the swirling water went Jonah. Then, gulp! Something swallowed him. Jonah was in the stomach of a big fish. God left him there to learn an important lesson. It took 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, Jonah prayed to God.
Lord, I praise you and I thank you. You saved me from death. I promise that I will do what you want.
So God spoke to the great fish. It swam up close to the beach and spit Jonah out of its stomach and onto dry land.
Now, get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. When you get there, preach what I tell you to preach.
This time, Jonah didn't argue. he obeyed right away, jumping up and heading straight for Nineveh.
Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. When Jesus was 12 years old, his family traveled to Passover along with many other families, as they always had before. When the celebration was over, Mary and Joseph started to return home.
Joseph, do you know where Jesus is?
He was with my cousin's family last time I saw him.
After traveling all day, Mary and Joseph realized Jesus wasn't with any of their friends or relatives. They were very worried and started back to Jerusalem, looking for him all along the way.
Where is my son?
By the time they got back to Jerusalem, it was nighttime, too late to look for Jesus. The next day, they searched all around the big city.
I'm looking for a boy about this tall.
But couldn't find Jesus anywhere. Another night came without any sign of him. On the third day of their search, Mary and Joseph were walking past the temple, a place where God's people went to worship. Coming from inside the temple, they heard a familiar voice. They rushed inside, and there was young Jesus, talking with some teachers, just like he was one of them. He asked them questions. He answered theirs. His mother had a question too.
Son, why did you stay behind? We were worried about you.
Oh, you should have known. I must be where my father's work is.
After feeding thousands of men and their families with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, Jesus told his followers to sail to a town on the other side of the lake.
Go ahead to Bethsaida. I will come later.
So his helpers got into a boat to cross the big lake, while Jesus went up into the hills to pray. In the middle of the lake, a strong wind began to blow, making large waves. In the boat, the followers were having trouble. Soon, they saw something that frightened them more than the storm. A man walking on the water.
It's a ghost!
But it wasn't a ghost. It was Jesus walking on the water.
Have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid.
Peter, is it really the Lord?
Lord, if that really is you, then tell me to come to you on the water.
Come.
So Peter left the boat and walked on the water to Jesus. But when he saw the wind and the waves, he became afraid and began to sink.
Lord, save me!
Jesus reached out his hand and caught Peter.
Your faith is small. Why did you doubt?
After Peter and Jesus were in the boat, the wind became calm. Then those who were in the boat worshipped Jesus.
Truly, you are the Son of God.
Jesus was watching people put their money into the collection box at the temple where God's people worshiped. Some rich people were very proud as they put in a lot of money. Then a very poor woman came. In went her 2 small coins.
This woman gave more than the rich people with many coins. The rich people gave only what they did not need, but this poor woman gave all the money she had.
That evening, Jesus and his followers got into a boat and set out across the lake. Soon a strong wind began to blow. Waves came over the side of the boat. Jesus' followers were very frightened. But Jesus was fast asleep at the back of the boat. The followers went back and woke Jesus.
Teacher, don't you care about us? We'll drown!
Be quiet.
Be still. Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?
What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.
One day, Jesus went to visit his friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Martha was busy getting the meal ready, while Mary sat listening to Jesus talk. Before long, Martha became angry and complained to Jesus.
Lord, don't you care that Mary left me to do all the work alone? Tell her to help me.
Martha, Martha, you were so worried and upset. There's only one important thing here. Mary has chosen the right thing, and it will never be taken away from her.
Another time, as Jesus was traveling, he came to a small town where 10 men saw him. They didn't come close to Jesus because they had the horrible skin disease, leprosy. So they called out to him,
Jesus, Master, please help us.
Jesus wasn't afraid to be close to the men.
Go. Go on. Go show yourselves to the priests.
As the men went to do what Jesus had told them, their leprosy disappeared. One of the men turned and came back to Jesus.
Thank you, Lord. Praise be to God.
On your way now. You were healed because you believed me.
Peter, one of Jesus' helpers, came to tell Jesus it was time to pay taxes. But neither of them had any money. Jesus knew just what to do.
Go to the lake and catch a fish. You will find a coin in its mouth. Use that coin to pay our taxes.
Sick people followed Jesus everywhere. They wanted him to heal them. One man who was blind heard that Jesus was walking by. He cried out,
Jesus, please help me.
People told the man to be quiet, but Jesus asked the man,
What would you like me to do for you?
The man said,
I want to see again.
So Jesus healed the man's eyes. How happy the man was to see again. Another time, one of Jesus' friends named Lazarus got very sick. Mary and Martha sent a message to Jesus asking him to come heal their brother. Even though Jesus loved his 3 friends, he waited 2 days to start the trip to see them. And Lazarus died before Jesus got there. Martha and Mary said,
If you had come earlier, our brother wouldn't have died.
Hearing this, Jesus cried. He went to the tomb of Lazarus.
Lazarus,
Come out.
And out came Lazarus, wrapped in the burial cloths. He was alive and well. There was a mean man chasing after Jesus' followers. His name was Saul. He was sure that everything people were saying about Jesus was wrong. He didn't believe Jesus had risen from death. He was so sure he was right that he hurt and even killed people who believed in Jesus. Well, guess what? God wanted Saul to work for him and spread the news of Jesus. So one day, when Saul was on a journey, God sent a bright flash of light. It was so bright that Saul fell to the ground.
Saul, why are you doing things against me? Who are you? I am Jesus. Now get up and go into the city.
When Saul stood up, he was blind. His friends had to lead him into the city. Saul wouldn't eat or drink anything for 3 days. God sent a man named Ananias to find Saul and pray for him so that Saul could see again. Ananias was scared of Saul, but he believed in Jesus and went anyway. Ananias prayed for Saul, and Saul's sight came back. On that day, God changed Saul's heart to make him kind to those who believed in Jesus. After that, Saul was called Paul, and he began to tell others about Jesus too, and became the greatest missionary of all time. After Paul became a follower of Jesus, he went everywhere, teaching people about the Lord. Many times, there was no building where he could meet with friends. One day, he and his friends were looking for a place to meet by the river when they saw a group of women. One woman was Lydia. Her job was selling purple cloth. She loved God, but didn't know about Jesus. When Paul told her all about Jesus, Lydia believed that Jesus was God's son. Lydia invited Paul and his friends to stay at her house. Some people didn't like what Paul was preaching about Jesus, so they caught Paul and his helper, Silas, and threw them in jail. The two men were beaten, and their feet were fastened tightly, so they couldn't run away. That night, instead of complaining or crying, Paul and Silas prayed and sang songs to God. Suddenly, there was an earthquake, and the jail doors popped open. The jailer thought his prisoners had escaped. He knew if the prisoners had escaped, he would be in big trouble. Paul called to him.
We are all here.
What must I do to be saved?
Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and all the people in your house.
Then he and all his people were baptized immediately. So the jailer took Paul and Silas to his home to wash their wounds and feed them. He and his family were very happy because they now believed in God.
Paul was a missionary who traveled to Athens in Greece to tell people about Jesus. In Athens, he saw an altar with writing that said, "To a God who is not known." Paul told the people about the God who made the whole world.
God does not live in temples that men build, but in their hearts.
Paul told them about Jesus coming back to life after being dead. Some of the people laughed at Paul, but some of the people believed in Jesus. Later, Paul got on a big ship to go to the city of Rome. The ship went out very slowly because of strong winds blowing against it. Finally, they came to a safe harbor.
I don't think it's a good idea to leave the harbor.
But the captain disagreed, and he sailed anyway. Soon a wind came up and blew hard on the ship. The sailors couldn't steer it. Paul knew they were in trouble. They might sink.
We all need to eat to stay strong for the trouble ahead.
Before long, the ship hit a sandbank and began to break into pieces. Everyone had to jump into the sea and swim for the beach. They all made it to the shore safely. All the people from the shipwreck were now on the island of Malta. The people who lived on the island were very kind. They built a fire and invited the passengers to warm themselves. Paul helped by gathering wood for the fire. But as he did, a poisonous snake bit him on the hand. Paul just shook the snake off into the fire. He was not even hurt. The island people waited for him to fall down dead from the poison. But Paul was just fine.
He died without children to continue his family. His life on earth.
Philip was one of Jesus' 12 followers. He was busy telling people about Jesus when an angel spoke to him.
Philip, go out on the road.
along came a very important officer from Ethiopia riding in his chariot. He was reading the book of the prophet Isaiah. Philip ran alongside the chariot to talk to the man.
Do you understand what you're reading?
No. I need someone to explain it to me.
The officer stopped the chariot and invited Philip to sit with him. The verse of scripture the Ethiopian was reading was this: "He was like a sheep being led to be killed. He said nothing and died without children to continue his family."
Please tell me, who is the prophet talking about?
Philip explained that Isaiah was actually writing about Jesus. As they continued, the Ethiopian man began to believe in Jesus. Soon the chariot came near a stream.
Look, here's some water. What stops me from being baptized right now?
So they stopped the chariot and Philip baptized him. When they walked back out of the water, God wanted Philip to preach in another place. So, just like that, Philip was gone. So the officer returned home with his heart full of joy. After Jesus had been taken up into heaven, mean King Herod began doing terrible things to the followers of Jesus. He even had some of them killed. Some Jewish people were happy that Herod was doing this, because they didn't believe in Jesus or like his followers. So to please the people, Herod decided to throw Peter in jail too. The king ordered 16 soldiers to guard him over the Passover holiday. But while Peter sat in jail, God's people gathered in their homes to pray for him. That night, an angel came into the jail cell and woke Peter up.
Hurry, get up.
Peter's chains fell off, but the soldiers kept sleeping.
Follow me.
Peter thought he must be dreaming, but he followed the angel right past all the guards. When they came to the iron gate of the prison, it swung open on its own. But after they had walked a few steps into the city, the angel disappeared. So Peter went to the house of some friends who lived nearby and knocked on the door. A servant girl went to the door and asked who was there.
Who is it? It's Peter. The Lord sent his angel to rescue me from Herod.
The girl recognized Peter's voice and quickly ran to tell the group.
Peter is at the door.
Hello?
But the friends didn't believe the girl and went back to praying for Peter. They didn't realize that their prayers had already been answered. They finally listened to the girl and went to open the door. And that's how God saved Peter from the mean King Herod.
And an angel came to me. He freed me from my chains, and he let me out the door.
The biggest promise God ever made was that his children will live with him in heaven forever. He said that there would be a new heaven and a new earth. And we would get a new body, one that never gets old. In the new heaven, no one will ever be sad, or cry, or feel any pain, and no one will ever die. The streets will be made of gold, and there will be huge gates of pearl. Everything will be more beautiful than anything you can imagine. And best of all, Jesus will be there, and we will be with him forever. Always remember this: no one has ever seen. No one has ever heard. No one has ever imagined. What God has prepared for those who love him. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9.